Welcome to this special edition of Apex Sunday. We're doing some coverage on the greatest drivers. We can't cover all of them, but we're going to start in the early days and move forward. Don't forget to click like, don't forget to subscribe, and please share this if you like it. And click thumbs down if you don't like it, but please do click something.
Thanks, John.
This is Rob. This is Rob, and I'm John.
Hello. So, with Lewis's 100th win and 101 pole positions, he's Formula One's first century man. He's got a century of poles, a century of wins. No doubt he's going to get more wins and more poles. But we're going to start from the beginning, and we'll start with Juan Manuel Fangio. Some consider him the greatest of all time. Perhaps you do. I'm not so sure, but let's talk about Fangio's record. Okay, so if we take a look at Juan Manuel Fangio, taking a quick look at his numbers, he had 8 seasons. He contested 51 races. He had 29 poles in those 51 races. He won 24 of them. He podiumed in 35 and had championships in 5 of the 8 seasons. So, the top record, unbelievably, in terms of percentages, he's got 62.5% championships. He's on pole 56.9%. He won races 47.1% and podium 68.6%. So that is probably unbeatable in the history of Formula One.
Nobody will ever touch it. Nobody's going to touch that. And people like Jackie Stewart, people like Emerson Fittipaldi, who isn't on our list. We aren't covering Mo. We aren't covering a bunch of great guys, Ascari, and anyway, they all very clearly state that the greatest driver of all time is Fangio.
Right.
If you move forward through the eras, I don't think you can say that. I don't think there is a greatest driver of all time. Definitely the best of his era.
Oh, absolutely.
Definitely the best of his era.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's 100%, right?
Yeah.
And when you're racing at that time, it was much more dangerous, and he was in the front engine cars, wasn't he? I remember seeing footage of him. He's always got these huge steering wheels and so forth. But as you say, best of his era, he distinguished himself at that time. So let's move on to Niki Lauda next. So he contested 13 seasons, and he contested 173 races within that. He had 24 poles, 25 wins, 54 podiums, and 3 championships. So we see, in contrast to Fangio, the numbers are way, way down. 23.1% of the championships, 13.8 on pole, 14.4 for races, and 31% for podiums. But regardless, unbelievable record as well. I mean, 3 championships, 23% of championships in all the seasons that you've contested is pretty impressive to me.
Yeah. I mean,
and lots of podiums too.
He was the first machine that I remember.
Mm-hmm.
He was the first non-character. I mean, in that era of, he came in at the end of Graham Hill's era, and Graham Hill was a multi-champion, and all of those guys were characters, like partying and playboys, having a blast. But yeah, what a god.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that movie that was made about him, what was it called again? I can't remember. Driven, wasn't it?
Yes.
Not a bad film. What did you think of it?
I was scared to watch it. I thought I was going to hate it, and I ended up loving it.
That's why I say it's not a bad film, because usually they're very, very bad, aren't they?
Yeah. I think it's one of the greatest car films ever. It's right up there with Grand Prix and Frankenheimer's Grand Prix and Le Mans. Those.
Do you think he's sort of the prototype of the modern driver, the way he worked, the way he talked to his mechanics and all that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, you've got to realize that in that same era earlier, there were people like Bruce McLaren and Brabham and Surtees that built their own car. Right. They aren't the only 3, but they're the one, they built their own car, and they were working, 20-hour days 7 days a week and testing, and they were just building Grand Prix cars.
Mhm.
Well, McLaren wasn't anyway.
And funny
Lotus.
thing about Lauda also is that he had to pay for some of his drives to get started, right? So, it's very, very interesting. Up next, we have Jim Clark, and he contested 9 seasons and 72 races. Out of that, he had 33 poles, 25 wins, 32 podiums, and 2 championships. So, again, if you look at the race wins and poles, like 45.7, 34.7%, on the podium 44.4%. This story with all of these guys is consistency, basically, right? And delivering over and over and over again and getting these numbers. And that's why they're champions, and that's why they have so many wins. And I know Senna was a huge fan of Jim Clark. He was known for his timely consistency, the same lap time, lap after lap after lap. I wish I had seen him race. I've only seen some footage of him and some documentaries.
He'd never put a wheel wrong. He was a master pilot. Jackie Stewart said that he's the best man he ever raced against.
Right.
And that he was far superior than Jackie. Tragic that he died. Nobody ever thought that he could die because he was just such a fantastic driver, and he died in
was that an F2 race in
an F2 race? Yes.
Yeah.
And went into the woods, and that was it.
Yeah. Back in the days. Tragic. Oh yeah. Very, very bad. But speaking of Jackie Stewart, he's our next driver. So let's take a look at Jackie. So he contested 9 seasons, and in those seasons, he contested 100 races, 17 poles, 27 wins, 43 podiums, and 3 championships. So again, a quarter of the races, or over the quarter of the races he contested, he won. He's close. He's over 40% in terms of podiums and 33% in terms of championships. So quite remarkable. And he didn't start in the greatest cars, did he?
He was my first. His era was when I got interested in Formula One. I was 11 years old, I guess, and saw him race at Mosport and just watched him slaughter everybody in the Tyrrell. And he started out with Matra and raced very hard and put the car where it didn't belong, and got noticed. And then I think it had to take a lot of courage for him to go with Tyrrell, because Tyrrell was building his cars on a dirt floor. And sure enough, it's just 71, 73 championships in 1971 and 73 up against some really, really formidable drivers. Not that all of these guys didn't have that, but
sadly he retired a little bit earlier than many people thought he would have, right? Because many deaths, and Severe went, and that was the final straw for him. So, that's the other unfortunate story about going back in the past, is there's more.
According to his biography, I read his biography a few years ago, and he decided halfway through that season that was going to be his last season, but he didn't tell anybody. Right. He told Ken Tyrrell and nobody else. Didn't tell his wife, didn't tell anybody. And then when Francois Severe was killed, who I managed to see in his last race in 1973 at Mosport, that was enough for him, and he just backed out. Yeah.
Severe probably would have went on to win a championship or two, do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. And according to Jackie, he was there.
Right.
And that was just a horrible, horrible, horrible death.
He's another example of a guy who, didn't start out with 100 winning all the time or anything, but he grew into his role, and unfortunately we never saw him afterwards. So, and then unfortunately we have probably your least favorite driver, I'm guessing, next, and that would be our Nigel Mansell. So he does have a lot of wins. That's why he's on this list. He's contested 15 seasons, 188 races, 32 poles, 32 wins, 59 podiums, and the 1 championship. I know he was close to a second, but that didn't work out for him. So he had a very mixed career as well. So pretty low on the pole positions for this amount of wins, but pretty high on the podiums. And of course, with only one championship, he has only 6.7% of the championships he contested. So what are your thoughts on Mansell? For me, when I got into F1 in 92, seeing Schumacher and Mansell race at Spa, I came into F1 with no perception and no knowledge of any of the drivers or what their history was and so forth. I quickly came to conclude that Nigel Mansell likes to complain.
Yeah.
And that would be kind of his defining personality trait. But as a driver, I guess he had a reputation. They called him the Lion when he was at Ferrari. I guess he was sort of a field driver. Although having said that, he got along with the active suspension Williams, which Patrese hated because he couldn't feel it. I guess Mansell trusted that what he couldn't feel for that. Prost the same way when he went.
It's just he isn't that bright, so he didn't matter. Yeah, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that. I'm going to get a lot of heat for this, but in my mind, Nigel Mansell is one of the best that's ever been when it comes to racecraft, but not driving. And his ability to keep people behind him, it's right up there with Michael Schumacher's ability to punt people off the track.
Right. So basically, that's your summary of Mansell.
Yes.
Okay. So up next, we have Fernando Alonso. So let's take a look at him, because for Fernando, it's very interesting because of the kind of choices he's made and where he's went. So let's take a look at Fernando. So he's top in terms of seasons. He's tied with Schumacher at 18 contested seasons. He's top in the number of races he's contested with 329. Of that, he's got 22 poles, 32 wins, 97 podiums, and 2 championships. And you can see that his championship numbers in terms of percentage, pole and race wins in terms of percentage, pretty low. Podiums fairly high, especially for that amount of races. So this is a prime example of a very, very, very top F1 driver, perhaps easily in the top 10, I'd say, of all time. And yet he's only got 2 championships, and, you know, his numbers don't compare very well with some of the others, but that's because he's got a very long time in the sport. And he went to Ferrari at the wrong time because Vettel was at Red Bull at the time. So he won his championships with Renault, and he went to McLaren. That didn't work out with him and Lewis. So what are your thoughts on Alonso's record so far, especially in comparison to these other drivers?
I think that he fits in the same slot as a whole heap of drivers that are absolute genius drivers that just never got in the right chair. Yes. Like Sterling Moss belongs in this list. Right. He really belongs in this list. He is one of the greatest of all time. And many would say the greatest of his era. Mm-hmm. Never won a championship because he never got in the right car. Yeah. Was it because of his personality? I don't know. Sterling Moss was the first guy to get major payday. Alonso, on the other hand, just the wrong car, man. Like, he never got in the right car. Prime example is he's well past his best buy date, and look at how he's performing. Yeah. So imagine, I mean, the guy should have 10 championships under him, but
yep. Yeah, absolutely. It's a story of, it's like a driver's, it's not just their talent. There's so many factors, the decisions they make, how they get along with people, you know, it goes on and on and on.
Who their engineer is. Yep.
But Fernando is easily one of the top, you know, I think he's one of the top drivers of all time. So
me too.
But, you know, the numbers don't show that, but he is at least a 2-time champion. So there's that. Mm-hmm. So next up is probably most people's selection for the greatest driver of all time in Formula One, and that would be Ayrton Senna. So he contested 11 seasons, 162 races. He had 65 poles, 41 wins, 80 podiums, and 3 championships. So we see pretty high numbers, a quarter championships of the races that he contested. or the seasons that he contested. He's on pole for over 40% of the time. He won a quarter of his races and basically just shy of 50% of the podiums for all of the races. So, you know, that's why he's Ayrton Senna. That's why he did so well. And that's why he's a legend.
And he didn't necessarily do it with the fastest car. He was able to do it when he didn't even have the fastest car. And and God knows he's in the same boat as a few other of the people that we've talked about, that, you know, if he'd continued on and he hadn't tragically lost his life, how many championships would he have won? You know, and he was the model in my mind for Schumacher.
Right.
A cross between him and Nigel Mansell. He took Nigel Mansell's racecraft. Schumacher took the racecraft to a new level. But oh my God, like work ethic. I think Senna was the first one to devote his life to you know, I shouldn't say that, but the first great driver to dedicate his life to working with the team to develop the car for himself.
And Schumacher also took from him the running into people. They both, that's the unfortunate thing about those particular champions, those two champions in particular, you know, their reputations are soured by that factor. So let's move on to one of my favorites, but not one of yours, Alain Prost, who has just slightly better record than Ayrton Senna in terms of championships. So he contested 13 seasons, 199 races. From that, he had 33 poles, 51 wins, 106 podiums, and 4 championships. So, you know, 30% for the championships he contested in terms of the seasons. That's pretty high. Pole position, I'm not surprised to see that a bit lower because he wasn't the great, like the fastest drivers. 25% of the races and 50% of his podium. So again, very, very impressive record. Known as the Professor. What do you think of that sort of nickname for his reputation? Is that
it's perfect
the nickname he deserves, right?
It's perfect. You know what? He was a brilliant driver. Had some major shortcomings.
Yeah, you said the rain, right?
All you have to do is look at his podiums. Look at his percentage of podiums. Take a look at that number again, and yeah, the guy, Jesus.
Yeah, 52.5%.
That's absolutely mental. And yeah, attitude.
Yeah,
a great driver, but I wouldn't put him in the top in my mind because he's not all around. You know, yeah.
The thing about Prost that interests me, as say compared to Villeneuve or Senna, who are known to be drivers that you can see them driving, you can see them squirreling around and so forth. You know, Prost is obviously the opposite of that. You rarely saw him lose it or squiggly and so forth. So, you know, the Professor, because he's a smooth driver, but is it more than that? Is it precision? Is it throttle control?
He's like Niki Lauda. You know, the difference is when you look at a Villeneuve, heck, if you look at Lewis, if you look at Kimi, when they get out of shape, they gather back up again.
Yeah. Same with Hamilton.
And they have the ability to do that. However, you didn't see Lauda get out of shape much. You didn't see Prost get out of shape much because their approach to their driving style was so different. They'd go and they hammer their line. They'd figure out the fact they were smart enough and skilled enough to find the fastest line. And like Jimmy Clark, just so precise.
Yeah, they call them clinical. These are the kind of words, precise, clinical. And so I think people associate that with less passion and less emotion for the sport and so forth. But it's just a different way of winning.
I see. I don't consider that an all-around driver. I don't, because now I have to know that I'm going to go into corner 3, too hot, and I'm going to compromise my exit to pass somebody. And he didn't do that. He wouldn't do that. And neither did, well, Jimmy Clark did, because he had the skill to just lap everybody. But that preciseness is what Lauda had. And yeah, so it opens up the door when you can look at, Jacques Villeneuve driving around the outside, where people look at it and go, what are you doing? You don't do that there. And
right.
He'd do it. Or Gilles Villeneuve, the same thing. His dad and James Hunt and a bunch of other drivers that would do that. So it's just not my kind of driver.
I see. Yeah, I think I would probably be that type of driver. Calculated, smooth.
I think you would be too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I guess just the type of personality and the way you approach things that defines the way you drive as well. All right, so let's move on to the top 3 in terms of wins of all time. And next is Sebastian Vettel. So he's contested 15 seasons, 272 races. Out of that, he had 57 poles, 53 wins, 122 podiums, and 4 championships. So again, we see some pretty high numbers, especially the podiums. That consistency will get you those championships. Pole position, not that much, but still 20%. That's still pretty high. Same with the races and the championships, a quarter. So very, very good numbers for Sebastian. And he, along with, I guess, Schumacher and Hamilton, are sort of the true modern drivers in the era of reliability of cars, which makes a massive difference. And that's why they have so many numbers as well, right? But having said that, they've delivered in that era, right? So,
and close to triple the races that they had in the era of Fangio.
Absolutely. So people can say, well, they have it easier in the terms of they've got more races to make more numbers, but then they've got more races to make less impressive numbers as well. So it's it's relative, and that's why we look at the percentages. But Sebastian, he reminds me a little bit of Alonso in the fact that he went to Ferrari to try to win a championship with them. That never happened. And, it's unfortunate. I think he might have a couple more championships in him if he had made some slightly different decisions as well. So
he still might.
Yeah, he looks like he's going to stay around, so we'll see. So next up is number 2 in terms of wins, and this is no surprise. It's Michael Schumacher. So he's up there in terms of seasons with Alonso. He contested 18 because he came back with Mercedes later in his career. So there were 308 races. Out of that, he had 68 poles, 91 wins, 155 podiums, and 7 championships. So we see that championships, 38.9%, second only to Lewis and Fangio, 29.5%, so close to 30% race wins and 50% podiums. So impressive numbers as well.
Impressive numbers, and yet not loved because of the way he did it. Right. And ruthless as all get out. And Senna is more loved than he is. A lot of people will dismiss Michael. But you know what? I never thought anybody was going to beat Michael's numbers.
No.
I didn't think any team could keep a number 1 driver like Lewis and have the dominant car for the length that they've had the car. He was a god. He was just like Senna in that he was so ruthless.
Yeah.
He would do anything to win. To win. I mean, driving into walls to stop qualifying because he had pole position. That kind of says it all. It's like, I'm not going to let anybody else beat me, whatever it takes. I don't care what it is. If I have to break somebody's legs, I'll do it.
Yeah, strange mentality. And through that faux documentary that we saw, I laughed aloud.
Don't use the word documentary.
That's why I put faux in front of it. But I laughed aloud when I think it was Coulthard saying, "No, Michael, you make mistakes as well." And Michael's like thinking for a while, "No, I don't think so."
Right.
So it's just, I find that hilarious. So let's move on to the century man, Lewis, who's had 101 poles, and 100 wins. So let's take a look at his record. So he's contested 15 seasons. In that, he's contested 281 races, 101 poles, 100 wins, 179 podiums, and 7 championships. So second, yes, only to Fangio in terms of the championships he's won in the seasons he's contested, 46.7, so close to 50. Pole position, very impressive, 35.9, 35.6 for the races, and 62.6 for the podiums. So that's why he's the century man, and he definitely is the embodiment of the modern driver in the modern era, and he's definitely the driver of his era, I would say.
Yeah, okay. He'll go down in history that way. I don't think he is. I think that if
of this era, you think Alonso might be better?
I think that Alonso's attitude would wipe that chance out, I think. Mm-hmm. But there are many other drivers that just never got the chance, like Hülkenberg as an example. We could pick a dozen. The big thing with Lewis is the numbers are so skewed because he jumped straight into the fastest car. He jumped straight into a winning car from the beginning of his career. Mm-hmm. And just his whole career, he's had the fastest car. So he better have those numbers if he's willing to hang out and do that. All that said, all that negativity, there's the positive end of it, and his constant improvement in his skills and his listening to the team. I don't know if he has the ability to develop a car. I don't know if he has that. I know that he can listen, and I know he has the skill to drive it.
Yeah. I'm not sure any of us know about development skills. How do we know that?
Well, I don't.
So far divorced from that.
I don't think that comes into play in the same way as it did 15 years ago.
I remember Senna saying that he wanted. It was Martin Brundle, but who was the guy? Mark Blundell. He wanted him as his test driver. He said, "This guy he needs to be my test driver." Like, he was very specific on what he wanted done. So, yeah, these days, like, test driving is almost non-existent anyways, Right. So I will say that Lewis, like you said, he came in with the top car with the McLaren, and then he went to Mercedes, who weren't top on his first year, but after that, absolutely the top car.
Right.
But, he delivered again. He did what he needed to do against all his teammates. He lost to Nico that one time, very closely contested championship. It reminds me of Marc Marquez in MotoGP. When he gets a new teammate, he says, well, if you're driving for Honda, if you're not on the podium, it's a disaster. So he outlines his expectations, and people got down on Mark saying, oh, you're trying to discourage your teammate from winning. But the fact is, he drives for Honda too, or rides for Honda. So he's expected to have those podiums and wins as well. And so Lewis has gotten those wins, those podiums, those pole positions throughout his entire career. He's had, little bits of dips here and there. I remember Felipe Massa and him had a lot of contact a couple seasons. But otherwise, with all that pressure and all those expectations, I do think he's this era's driver.
Okay. Go for it. Look at the numbers will attest to that. Mm-hmm. Has he ever been a number 2 driver?
No.
Right out of the gate, he's never been a number 2 driver.
Yeah, but right out of the gate, he scored the same amount of points as Fernando Alonso. So
with the faster car, you know what?
Oh, it was the same car though. The same
was it?
Team. Yeah, I don't think people go on about all that kind of stuff. Like, oh, they were favoring this guy and that guy, but I don't think the engineers and so forth were sabotaging anyone or anything like that.
I don't. Yeah, I was there. I got to watch his first win. Yeah, he's a great driver. And he's hard on himself, which I think is mandatory.
Right. Yeah. All right. So going forward, I saw Ross Brawn saying he thinks Lewis can get up to about 120 wins. He's got 2 more seasons at least. I'm not so sure about that. We'll see how Max does this season and next season with the new cars and so forth. But like we said, we didn't think that Schumacher's record of championships would ever be matched.
No,
it may be surpassed if he wins his 8th this season. So we could see some other great drivers. And as far as I'm concerned, we've got Norris, Russell,
Max Verstappen is a child.
Sainz, Verstappen, Leclerc.
He's still a child.
Yeah.
He's still a child.
And if we look at the drivers in terms of percent for each category, measuring each category against the number of races/seasons they've participated in, we see Fangio on top in every single category, with Lewis in second in every single category, which places him amongst the very best of the sport. And of course, F1's only century man thus far.
More stories to be written,
Oh, yeah.
for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I'd like to congratulate Lewis being the century man. Amazing achievement. So
Absolutely.
good for him.
Kudos. Yes.
Yeah. All right, John, thanks for the quick chat about these top drivers, and we'll see you next time.
You got to tell me who your favorite driver is before you say goodbye. Because I know you have a favorite. You must have a favorite driver.
I've had a favorite team, and that would be Williams. So I hope they do better going forward. Driver. I think right now it's going to be Lando and Danny, the 2 McLaren drivers. So Danny's been my favorite for quite a while, and Lando this season has become a favorite of mine. So what about you?
Of the current drivers, it's Lando hands down.
Right.
I'd like to say Alonso just because I'd like to see him come back, but he's a little bit long in the tooth, I think.
And what about historically, all time? Do you have one?
Oh, no, I can't go there. I can probably go through the eras, and I've read an awful lot about these guys and what all the drivers from the beginning, and they're just some unbelievable stories. So it's kind of tough to say. I love Jackie Stewart at the time he was racing.
Yeah, I'm not fond of Stewart after he raced. He's too corporate for me. He's too, you shouldn't appear this way and that way. I mean, he made a lot of money working for corporations and talking for them and so forth. So I understand that, but that's not for me.
If I could pull one guy out of history and say I can plunk him into today, it would be Clark. I would take Jim Clark. I think Fangio. That was in a day where car control was a completely different thing.
Yep.
And he raced a lot of endurance racing. But anyway.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I take Clark and Prost maybe. Those are my 2 smooth type of, those are the type of drivers that appeal to me. So it would probably be them.
And then there's Gilles. And then there's Gilles Villeneuve.
Yeah, Gilles. Did you get to see him much?
Yes, but I didn't see him in Grand Prix. I only saw, and I didn't actually get to a Grand Prix that he raced in, but I did see him in the under formulas. I saw him in Atlantic. And
did you see him on television in Formula One?
Oh yeah, every race.
Okay, yeah. Obviously, it was before my time in terms of F1 fandom. So I've read a couple of books about Gilles, and I think he's another guy. He's known for a field driver, like he can feel his way out of anything kind of thing. But he was also extremely intelligent and thoughtful about how he raced. So I thought another sad death in this sport.
The Donaldson book is on Dylan. It was the one to read.
Yeah, it's the one I read.
Sorry to grind it out, Rob. I have to make sure that we ask people to click the like and share and subscribe,
and comment,
and comment, and look at our other shows too.
Okay, great, John. Thanks.
Thank you.
We'll wrap it up there. Bye, everyone.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.